In the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond the glittering cities of the great empires and the endless fleets of their conquerors, there existed a quiet belief among the dominant species. Humanity was outdated. They had advanced enough to join interstellar travel, yes, but compared to the elegant precision of plasma cannons, particle lances, and antimatter warheads, humans were still seen as crude creatures, clinging to tools and traditions that should have been long forgotten. To the Galactic Empire, humanity's stubbornness was a curiosity at best, a joke at worst, and nothing made them laugh harder than the old human obsession with artillery. Great cannons, heavy shells, explosive projectiles. Such weapons were considered ancient relics from a time before true spacefaring civilization. Why use gunpowder and steel when you could bend gravity or unleash beams of light hotter than stars? But what the Empire didn't know, or perhaps had chosen not to see, was that humanity had never abandoned those weapons. They had refined them, reinvented them, and stored them away in silence. On distant colonies, buried deep beneath mountains and oceans, humanity had preserved its ancient art of war, not as a museum piece, but as a weapon waiting for the right time. And when that time came, the galaxy would understand that there was nothing laughable about a shell the size of a shuttle tearing through armor, thicker than city walls. The story begins during the Empire's conquest of the Orion Fringe. Their fleets moved like storms, burning through weaker worlds and enforcing their dominance with brutal efficiency. They mocked resistance wherever it appeared, calling every rebellion a brief distraction before their inevitable victory. And on the edge of their warpath was a human colony, small by imperial standards, but rich in resources. The Empire expected another swift surrender. After all, what could humans possibly do? They had no fleets to match imperial cruisers, no orbital cannons that could withstand a single barrage, no advanced shields that could hold against plasma storms. When the Imperial commander broadcast their terms of surrender, he laughed openly as human envoys stood their ground. "What will you fight with?" he sneered. "Your rifles? Your tanks? Your toys of steel and powder?" His voice echoed across every channel, shared with his officers and soldiers, a performance meant to humiliate. To him, this was not war, it was theater. The humans were merely an audience forced to watch their own defeat. And yet, when the Imperial fleet entered orbit, they found no signs of fear. The colony below was fortified, but not with the sleek defenses the Empire expected. Instead, massive shapes rose from the plains and mountains, crude silhouettes against the sky, like beasts from another age. The Empire's sensors registered them as mechanical anomalies, giant cannons, rail systems, and something else they could not immediately classify. Primitive, outdated, useless. The Imperial officers mocked them at once. "Artillery," one of them said with disbelief. "Actual artillery. They plan to throw rocks at us." Laughter filled the bridge. They didn't bother to ready full shields. They didn't even adjust their formations. Why prepare against such foolishness? On the ground, though, humanity was silent. Engineers checked final coordinates, loaders prepared massive shells, and commanders gave quiet orders. They knew what was about to happen. Generations of development, testing, and secrecy had led to this moment. They had studied the Empire's armor, measured the timing of their shields, and built weapons that looked old but were anything but. These were not relics, they were monsters. The first shot came from a cannon dug into the side of a mountain, its barrel stretching half a kilometer. The shell it fired was not filled with crude explosives, but layered with alloys designed to pierce energy fields before detonating in a storm of kinetic force. As it launched, the very earth shook, dust and fire trailing behind the projectile as it screamed into the sky. Imperial scanners barely registered it before it struck. A cruiser, massive and proud, split open as the shell ripped straight through its hull, detonating deep inside. The laughter on the Imperial bridge died instantly. In the silence that followed, the burning remains of their ship drifted across the void. Proof that what they had dismissed as primitive was more terrifying than they could imagine. The Empire responded in fury, firing plasma down at the colony, but humanity's guns had already repositioned. Dozens of artillery pieces, hidden in valleys and beneath camouflaged domes, opened fire at once. Shells arced through the atmosphere, some guided by smart systems, others relying on sheer force. Each impact tore through Imperial armor, bypassing shields with designs that no one in the Empire had ever conceived of defending against. What was meant to be a simple show of dominance had turned into chaos, and at the center of it all were the human soldiers, watching through trembling ground as their cannons thundered again and again. For them, this was not just defense, it was vindication. They had carried the weight of centuries of mockery, of being told they were obsolete, of being treated as a minor species clinging to the past. Now, with every shot, they proved that their so-called old weapons were not weaknesses, but strengths the galaxy had never understood. Still, the Empire was vast, and one battle would not decide the war. The humans knew this. They knew the retaliation would be merciless. They knew reinforcements would come, fleets larger and deadlier than this one. But they also knew that they had struck the first blow. They had shown the galaxy that the Empire could bleed, and that humanity had the will and the means to make it happen. And so the question remains, how far can artillery carry a species in a war against an empire that spans the stars? Can steel and fire truly stand against plasma and antimatter? Or has humanity merely woken a beast far too large to be stopped? The next barrage is already being prepared. The Empire's ships are regrouping, and the world holds its breath as ancient thunder rises once more to challenge the future. Because in this war, the old ways are not forgotten. They are waiting. And the Empire has just learned too late that mocking humanity's weapons might be the last mistake they ever make. The sky burns, the cannons roar, and the fate of both sides hangs in the balance. The silence after the first barrage lingered like a weight over the battlefield. Even with the distant thunder of cannons still echoing through the valleys, there was a strange stillness in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. On the colony below, the people had gathered in bunkers and shelters, listening to the ground shake beneath them. To many, this was the first time they had seen or heard the massive artillery pieces in action. Until today, most of them had thought the stories were exaggerated, whispers of secret weapons buried in the mountains. Now they knew the truth. Humanity had kept something hidden, something powerful enough to shatter the Empire's pride. Deep in one of the command bunkers, officers stared at their displays, watching the readings come in. One of the younger technicians couldn't hide his shock. He had grown up believing the Empire's fleets were untouchable, their shields impossible to breach. And yet, the scanners showed clear evidence. Multiple Imperial ships destroyed, debris fields forming in orbit, energy signatures fading. For the first time in living memory, the Empire had not been the one dictating the terms of battle, but the victory was far from certain. Everyone in that bunker knew what would happen next. The Empire never tolerated humiliation, not even on the smallest scale. Reinforcements would arrive, and when they did, the retaliation would be merciless. That knowledge hung over the human commanders, as heavily as the smoke in the air above the colony. On the Imperial flagship, chaos had replaced arrogance. Officers scrambled to reorganize formations, their voices sharp and panicked. What had been amusement only minutes before had now turned into dread. No one had expected the humans to strike with such force. The commander stood at the center of it all, his expression hardened. He wasn't laughing anymore. He barked orders for shields to be reinforced, for gunners to concentrate fire on the ground positions, for scouts to identify the source of these primitive weapons. But every shot from the colony only deepened the wound to Imperial pride. He couldn't admit it aloud, but the commander was shaken. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen projectiles of such power. Plasma fire had always been superior, energy weapons always decisive. The idea that physical shells could punch through his ships was almost unthinkable, yet the wreckage floating across the void proved otherwise. Humanity had done the impossible, and in doing so, they had exposed a weakness the Empire didn't even know it had. Down on the surface, the crews of the artillery batteries moved with a grim determination. Each weapon was so massive that operating it took entire teams, their roles perfected through endless training. Some loaded the enormous shells, each one weighing more than a shuttle, while others monitored targeting data, adjusting for orbital movements. The weapons looked crude from a distance, but their engineering was the result of generations of refinement. What the Empire saw as outdated was, in truth, humanity's greatest masterpiece, a combination of old knowledge and new precision, wrapped in steel and silence. The gunners themselves felt the weight of what they were doing. Many of them had grown up under the shadow of imperial dominance, always told that resistance was hopeless. Now, as their cannons roared and ships exploded above them, they felt something different. Not just pride, but fear too, because they knew the Empire would not forgive. Each shot they fired was a message to the galaxy, and that message came with a cost. Among the civilians, rumors began to spread. Some believed the colony would become the birthplace of a larger rebellion. Others feared it would be reduced to ash as punishment. Parents held their children tighter, unsure if they would see another sunrise. Farmers, miners, and workers who had never seen battle now whispered about the thunder in the mountains as though it were a living thing. They didn't yet know if those cannons were their salvation or their doom. Meanwhile, far away from the battle on other human worlds, news of the fight began to trickle through hidden channels. Smugglers, traders, and independent captains carried word of what had happened on the Orion Fringe. For the first time, whispers of hope began to spread. If the Empire could be hurt, then maybe it could be fought. If humanity could stand, then maybe others could too. The story of artillery shattering warships became a spark in the dark. But whether it would ignite rebellion or be crushed by the Empire's fury remained to be seen. Back in orbit, the Imperial fleet began to regroup. Damaged ships limped behind the main line, while reinforcements from nearby sectors were already on their way. The commander had no choice but to acknowledge that this was no longer a simple operation. He had underestimated humanity, and now he needed answers. How had they built such weapons? How had they hidden them? And most importantly, how many more colonies possessed them? The thought haunted him even as he barked new orders. If one colony could destroy his ships, what would happen if a dozen colonies rose at once? The Empire's rule was built on fear, but fear was fragile. If humanity broke it, the galaxy could change forever. Yet for all their sudden success, the human commanders on the ground knew they were standing on a knife's edge. Supplies for the artillery were limited. Every shot they fired drained precious reserves, and reloading such massive weapons took time. They couldn't simply outgun the Empire forever. Strategy and timing were everything now. Their goal was not to destroy every Imperial ship, but to survive long enough to make their point undeniable. As the dust settled from the first exchange, the colony braced for what would come next. Families huddled in shelters. Soldiers prepared fallback positions. The artillery crews kept their hands steady, waiting for the order to fire again. Above them, the Empire's ships glowed against the darkness, ready to unleash their fury. The battle had only just begun, and both sides knew it. Humanity had struck the Empire, but the cost of that strike was yet to be paid. The cannons loomed in the valleys and mountains, silent for now, their barrels pointed at the sky like accusations. The Imperial fleet burned with anger, circling, waiting for reinforcements to arrive. Somewhere between those two forces, the future of humanity trembled. The old weapons had spoken, but their echo carried a question that no one yet dared to answer. Could artillery alone change the fate of a species in a galaxy ruled by empires? Or had humanity only awakened a storm that would soon sweep them away? The thunder was coming again. The cannons were reloading. The Empire was readying its fire. The people of the colony waited, hearts pounding, as the balance of survival teetered on the edge of the next shot. The night on the colony world did not feel like night at all. The sky was alive with fire, streaks of plasma carving lines through the atmosphere, countered by the deep, rhythmic thunder of the artillery buried in the earth. Every time the cannons fired, the ground shook, lights flickered, and people whispered prayers in the shelters. Humanity had drawn blood from the Empire, but the Empire was answering with rage. In the command bunker, officers studied the maps glowing on their screens. Red markers showed the positions of the enemy fleet overhead. Blue lines traced their own batteries across the surface. But the real battle wasn't just measured in ships and shells, it was measured in time. Every minute the colony held was a victory, a chance to prove they could stand. The commander on the ground, a weary man with scars that told of older wars, leaned over the table and spoke quietly. They will not let this insult stand. The next wave won't be like the first. They've seen what we can do now." His words carried a weight that silenced the younger officers. Out in the valleys, the artillery crews worked like machines. Their muscles burned, their ears rang, their hands blistered from constant labor. But they didn't stop. Each shell they loaded was more than just metal. It was a message fired into the heavens. Among them was a young loader who had never seen combat before this night. He had grown up on stories of Empire cruelty, had heard tales of their unbreakable fleets. Now, with every shell he heaved into the massive breach, he was rewriting those stories with sweat and blood. He wasn't sure if they would survive, but he knew he would never again think of the Empire as untouchable. High above, the Imperial fleet shifted. They had regrouped, reorganized, and adjusted their tactics. Smaller ships now darted forward, probing, testing, trying to map the human defenses. Bombardment patterns became sharper, calculated to flush out the hidden guns. On the flagship, the commander paced, his anger concealed behind cold calculation. "Primitive or not," he muttered, "no colony defies the Empire and survives." His officers avoided his gaze, for they all knew what was at stake. If this failure spread, if other systems learned that humans had the means to resist, the Empire's grip could fracture. A subplot unfolded quietly in the shadows of the colony. Not all humans agreed with the resistance. Some had long believed survival meant submission, that the Empire's rule, though harsh, was inevitable. In the shelters, whispers grew. "If we had surrendered, would our children be safer now?" One mother asked, as she held her little one close. Another man, older and bitter, shook his head. "They never would have spared us. Better to die standing." These arguments simmered beneath the surface. A reminder that humanity's greatest enemy might not only be the Empire above, but also fear within their own ranks. Meanwhile, in orbit, one of the Empire's younger officers began to feel unease gnawing at him. He had mocked the humans like everyone else, laughed when the commander dismissed their defenses. But now, as he stared at the reports of destroyed cruisers and crippled escorts, he wondered if the Empire had underestimated not just humanity's weapons, but their spirit. He thought of the colonies the Empire had crushed before, of the lives erased without question. For the first time in his career, he hesitated. Back on the ground, engineers hidden deep in mountain bunkers monitored the status of the artillery. Some of the weapons were overheating, components strained against the force of each shot. Ammunition stockpiles, though vast, were not infinite. The chief engineer, an older woman who had overseen the secret project for decades, muttered under her breath as she studied the data. "We built these to shock them, not to fight a war forever. We have to hold just long enough." Her eyes narrowed, knowing the Empire's retaliation would only grow fiercer. The cannons had proven humanity's strength, but could they endure the storm that followed? The civilians felt the weight of every explosion. In underground halls, families huddled together, listening to the muffled roars above. Children drew pictures of cannons firing into the stars, their crayons trembling with each blast. Elders recited old songs about resistance, voices rising above the fear. In small ways, the colony held on to its humanity, even as the Empire tried to break it apart. In the valleys, the artillery fired again, this time targeting the Empire's smaller ships. A shell screamed upward, struck its mark, and tore through an escort, scattering wreckage into the void. The crew cheered, but their joy was cut short when plasma rained down in retaliation, melting the earth around their position. They had to abandon one of the guns, its barrel warped from the heat. The crew retreated, carrying their wounded, knowing they had given ground but not yet lost the fight. The conflict deepened with every exchange. Humanity's greatest strength was its unpredictability, its refusal to fight on the Empire's terms. The artillery was not just a weapon. It was a statement, a refusal to be erased. Yet with each passing hour, the Empire adapted. Their targeting grew more precise, their bombardments more devastating. The humans on the ground knew the Empire would not relent until either the colony was dust or their fleet was shattered. Far from the front lines, in the dark corridors of the Empire's political chambers, messages from the battle began to arrive. Advisors and rivals whispered behind closed doors. If a single human colony could inflict such losses, what would happen if more worlds rose up? The seeds of doubt began to spread through the very heart of imperial power, though no one dared voice it aloud. The Empire had ruled for centuries through fear. Fear was cracking. On the colony, the human commander stood in the bunker, staring at the trembling lights on the display. "They'll come harder now," he said softly. His second-in-command looked at him, her face pale but determined. "Then we fire harder." Neither of them knew if those words were truth or just hope, but they carried the weight of every life depending on them. The conflict was no longer just about weapons or fleets. It was about pride, survival, and the future of an entire species. The Empire had mocked humanity's old ways, but now they were forced to reckon with them. Humanity, for all its flaws and divisions, had shown it could wound the giants of the galaxy. But the Empire was far from broken, and their wrath had only begun to unfold. Above the colony, more ships arrived. Shadows spread across the stars as reinforcements entered orbit, their weapons glowing with power. The artillery crews looked up, their hearts heavy but their resolve firm. They had chosen this fight, and now they would see it through, no matter the cost. The cannons waited, silent for a heartbeat, their barrels cooling in the night air. The people below prayed, whispered, and held on to hope. The Empire prepared its strike, and then the thunder began again. The stars above the colony disappeared beneath the growing shadow of the Imperial fleet. Reinforcements had arrived, larger and heavier than before, ships that dwarfed the wreckage already drifting in orbit. Their hulls glowed with lines of energy, weapons charging as if to remind everyone below that the Empire had no limits, no mercy. From the bunkers to the artillery crews, every human eye turned upward, and for the first time since the cannons had fired, silence spread across the colony. The Empire had come to crush them. In the command center, the atmosphere was suffocating. Screens flashed with red indicators as new ships registered on the scanners, each one a mountain of steel and plasma. The commander rubbed his temples, trying to calculate how long their defenses could last. The younger officers waited for his words, but none came at first. He simply stared at the growing fleet, knowing the next decisions he made would either give humanity another chance or end them entirely. The artillery crews in the valleys worked with desperate speed. Sweat poured down their faces as they loaded the next barrage of shells, their hands shaking from exhaustion, but never stopping. Every man and woman in those crews knew what waited above them. Each cannon was more than a weapon. It was the only wall between their families and destruction. The loaders whispered to each other as they worked, sharing small comforts, stories of home, promises that they would fire one more shell no matter what came next. On the flagship, the Imperial commander stood still, watching the colony with cold eyes. His fleet had been embarrassed once, but now he would erase that insult. Around him, his officers worked furiously, calculating bombardment patterns and adjusting shields. There was no laughter this time, no mockery, only focus. He spoke in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade. "We end this now. No survivors." His words carried the weight of Empire tradition, a reminder that no rebellion could be allowed to live. But among the Imperial officers, one man hesitated. He had seen the wreckage, had seen the power of the human artillery, and something inside him whispered that this battle was different. He didn't speak his doubts, but they lingered in his eyes, a seed of fear that perhaps the Empire was not invincible after all. As the Empire prepared to fire, the human commander gave the order. Every cannon on the colony roared at once, their thunder shaking the earth and splitting the sky. Shells streaked upward, glowing trails behind them as they tore through the atmosphere and smashed into the Imperial line. One ship's shields shattered, its hull breaking apart in flames. Another staggered under the impact, listing away as smoke bled into space. But the Empire didn't stop. Their counter-strike came like a storm, plasma bolts raining down with precision that left entire valleys burning. The artillery crews fought to keep firing even as the ground shook around them. One battery was destroyed in a single blast, its crew lost in the fire. Another had to abandon their weapon, running through smoke and falling debris as orbital fire turned their valley into a crater. Still, the cannons that survived fired again, defiance echoing into the void. In the shelters, civilians clung to one another as the walls rattled. Children cried, parents whispered that the guns would hold, even though fear weighed heavy in their hearts. An old man sat quietly listening to the artillery and muttered, "This is what it means to be human, to fight even when the stars themselves fall against you." His words spread through the shelter, giving courage where silence had threatened to take it away. The Empire pressed harder. Smaller ships descended into lower orbit, pouring concentrated fire towards suspected artillery sites. Drones were released, sweeping across the landscape with scanners and weapons, seeking out hidden positions. Humanity answered with their cannons, but the pressure grew with every passing moment. Ammunition was running low. The crews whispered about how many shells were left, knowing the numbers would not last forever. Deep in the mountains, the chief engineer monitored everything. She saw the overheating barrels, the dwindling reserves, the damage piling up with every exchange. She clenched her fists, whispering to herself, "Hold. Just hold long enough." She knew something the others didn't, a plan buried even deeper than the cannons themselves, but the timing had to be perfect. If the Empire realized too soon, the chance would be lost. The human commander knew too. His face showed the strain of carrying every life on the colony. He watched the artillery fire and fall silent, then fire again, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. But with each beat, the heart grew weaker. His officers asked for orders, whether to move civilians, whether to withdraw artillery to new sites, but he only shook his head. "We don't retreat. We fire until we can't." Above, the Imperial commander tightened his grip on the railing of his bridge. He could not understand why the humans still resisted. Their planet burned, their weapons fell silent one by one, and yet they refused to surrender. It enraged him more than the losses. It challenged everything the Empire believed. He barked another order. "Bring the Super Heavy down. End this with fire they cannot withstand." The words echoed like a death sentence. In orbit, a massive warship shifted position, larger than any that had entered the battle so far. Its core glowed with energy, preparing to unleash a weapon capable of leveling entire regions of the planet in a single strike. The humans saw it on their scanners, a red shape so large it made the others look small. The commander in the bunker felt the blood drain from his face. If that weapon fired, the colony would not survive. The artillery crews saw it too. Their hands moved faster, their voices rising in shouted commands. They knew this was the target that mattered, the one they had to stop no matter the cost. Shells were loaded, coordinates locked, and the cannons prepared to roar again. The entire colony seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if their old weapons could truly reach that monster in the sky. Civilians prayed. Engineers worked frantically to keep the systems alive, and officers in the bunker whispered to each other about what would happen if they failed. The tension was unbearable, the weight of survival pressing down on every soul. And then the Super Heavy's core flared brighter, a glow so strong it lit the clouds above the colony. The Empire was ready to fire. The humans gave the order. Every surviving cannon, no matter its damage, no matter how hot its barrel, unleashed one last barrage aimed at the giant. The thunder rolled across the world, the shells screaming upward in unison, cutting through the night. The Empire's shields flared as the impacts struck, one after another, shaking the massive ship. The question hung in the air. Would it be enough, or would the Empire's weapon fire and erase everything? The colony watched. The Empire braced. The artillery thundered again, and the story hung on the edge of that moment. With survival balanced on a single shot, the shells streaked upward, slamming into the massive Imperial warship with such force that the entire colony shook with the echo. Sparks danced across its shields, the glow of its energy core flickering as metal shrieked and split under the impacts. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. People in the bunkers dared to hope. Artillery crews, drenched in sweat and smoke, stared at the sky with wide eyes. Even the Imperial fleet paused, uncertain if the human barrage had truly done the impossible. But then the glow of the Super Heavy's core steadied, brighter than before, pulsing like a second sun above the planet. The warship had survived. Its weapon was primed, and with it came the promise of annihilation. The human commander in the bunker clenched his fists, his jaw locked. He knew that if the Super Heavy fired, everything they had fought for would vanish in an instant. He leaned close to the displays, searching for anything, any sign of weakness that might give them one more chance. That was when something unexpected happened. The sensors detected a second energy spike, not from the Super Heavy, but from deep space. For a moment, no one understood what they were seeing. Then the readings became clear. Another fleet was arriving, but not Imperial. A new force, signals scrambled, origin unknown. The bunker erupted in confused voices, some shouting that it must be reinforcements, others fearing it was another enemy. The commander only stared at the screen, his mind racing. Humanity had no fleet strong enough to intervene here. So who or what was coming? In orbit, the Imperial commander's expression shifted from anger to sharp suspicion. His officers scrambled to identify the newcomers, their scanners overwhelmed by the interference. Another rebellion? One asked. A rival faction? But the commander shook his head, unwilling to admit the possibility that someone else might seize this battle from his hands. He ordered the Super Heavy to hold its fire, delaying the strike until they could confirm what they were facing. The artillery crews on the surface did not know the details, only that the enemy had hesitated. For them, that hesitation was a gift. They reloaded with trembling hands, pushing their battered weapons to the limit. Every shell felt heavier, every breath tighter, but they knew the moment they stopped firing was the moment the Empire's wrath would consume them. Then the newcomers emerged from the interference. They were not a vast armada, not another Empire's fleet, but something stranger. Scattered ships, mismatched designs, patched hulls. Pirates, smugglers, renegades, a ragtag collection of vessels that had no reason to be here at all. Yet they had come, their weapons hot, their engines burning toward the battlefield. The humans in the bunker stared in disbelief. "Why would they risk this?" one officer whispered. The commander said nothing, but in his heart he understood. The Empire had made enemies across the stars, not just humans. Perhaps these outsiders had seen a chance to strike when the Empire was wounded. Or perhaps they simply wanted salvage from the wreckage. Whatever their reason, their arrival had shifted the balance. For the Empire, this was an insult layered upon insult. Not only had a human colony resisted them, not only had artillery shattered their pride, but now scavengers dared to intrude on Imperial territory. The commander's rage grew colder, sharper. He ordered his fleet to split, half maintaining the bombardment of the planet, while the other half turned to engage the new arrivals. This division created chaos. The once solid wall of Imperial firepower fractured as ships broke formation. The ragtag fleet dove into the gap, harassing the Empire with wild strikes, forcing them to defend from unexpected angles. For the humans below, it was a chance. Not salvation, not yet, but a chance to breathe, to fire again, to hope. The civilians in the shelters felt the tremors shift, less steady now, more chaotic. Rumors spread quickly. Some said reinforcements had come, others that the Empire was retreating. Fear and hope tangled together, impossible to separate. Mothers held their children tighter, unsure if they should prepare for death or survival. Among the artillery crews, exhaustion was reaching its peak. Some collapsed between barrages, pulled back to their feet by comrades shouting that they couldn't stop now. Smoke choked the air, metal groaned with every shot, but still the cannons fired. Each shell seemed like defiance carved in steel, hurled into the heavens with a fury that words could not capture. The Imperial commander, watching the ragtag fleet swarm his ships, realized something he had not considered. If these outsiders spread word of what they had seen, humans breaking Imperial warships with artillery, the damage to the Empire's reputation would spread faster than any fleet could contain. Fear, not firepower, had always been the Empire's strongest weapon. And fear was bleeding away with every minute this battle dragged on. On the colony, the human commander understood the same truth. The fight was no longer just for survival, it was for the story. If they fell but the tale of their resistance lived, humanity would have given the galaxy something the Empire could never extinguish. He turned to his officers and said, "Every shot counts now. Not for us, but for those who will hear of it." The ragtag fleet pressed harder, but they were outnumbered, outgunned and held together by little more than desperation. Their captains fought like wolves, darting in and out of fire, striking vulnerable targets, but one by one their ships began to fall. Still, each loss bought the humans below more time. That time came at a cost. The Super Heavy's weapon continued to charge, its glow now a blazing furnace in the sky. The Empire would not hesitate much longer. If it fired, the colony would be erased, no matter how many ships were lost around it. The human artillery crews knew it. They poured everything into their last shells, aiming again at the giant above. But then another twist came, darker than the rest. The scanners in the bunker picked up signals from the colony itself, not from the artillery, not from human forces, but from hidden beacons buried in the soil. Someone on the ground had betrayed them. Coordinates were being fed directly to the Empire, revealing the locations of the cannons, the bunkers, the shelters. The room erupted in shouts of disbelief. Who could have done it? Was it the dissenters who had argued for surrender? Was it someone who thought the Empire's promise of mercy was real? The commander's face hardened, realizing that the Empire was not just above them, but inside their ranks. Every shell fired, every civilian sheltered, was now in greater danger. On the flagship, the Imperial commander smiled for the first time since the battle began. The beacons gave him the accuracy he needed. He ordered his gunners to prepare strikes on the exact positions of the human defenses. The artillery might roar again, but this time the Empire would strike true. The humans didn't have time to root out the traitors. They didn't have time to protect every cannon. They only had time to fire, again and again, knowing the Empire's aim was closing in. The thunder rolled once more across the world, shells tearing upward toward the blazing Super Heavy. The ragtag fleet darted desperately, trying to keep the Imperial line distracted. Civilians prayed, cried, clung to each other. And in that moment, with betrayal in their midst and annihilation above, the colony stood on the edge of its final choice. The cannons roared. The Empire's weapons charged. The beacons burned in the ground, guiding death closer with every passing second, and the sky lit up as if the galaxy itself were about to decide whether humanity would endure or vanish. The sky was burning with light as the Imperial Super Heavy drew its power into a single devastating charge. Its glow pulsed across the battlefield, so bright it drowned out the stars. On the ground, people braced for the end. The bunkers shuddered with the vibrations. The artillery crews worked their cannons with bleeding hands, and the ragtag fleet above darted in reckless arcs, trying to distract the Empire's warships. Everyone knew that when the weapon fired, nothing on the surface would survive. The human commander stood silent in the bunker, staring at the flickering displays. The betrayal had given the Empire the exact coordinates of their defenses. Already the first targeted blasts from orbit were hitting close, shaking the walls and filling the air with dust. His officers shouted updates, begged for orders. But he knew there was only one choice left: to fire everything they had before the enemy unleashed its final blow. On the ridges above the colony, the artillery units worked with grim determination. Every cannon shook with the recoil, metal glowing hot, gears straining under the relentless fire. Crews shouted through the smoke, some falling to exhaustion only to be pulled back up by comrades. They fired not because they believed they would live, but because the story of their resistance might. The thunder of their shells rose like a heartbeat, matching the glow of the Super Heavy above. In orbit, the ragtag fleet fought a losing battle. Their patched-together ships had already begun to fall in flames, but their captains refused to retreat. They dove into the Imperial lines, ramming, crashing, detonating their engines in suicide runs that tore gaps in the Empire's formation. Every explosion was another spark of defiance, another distraction to buy the humans below a few more seconds. The Imperial commander watched with growing fury. The humans should have broken long ago, yet still they fought, still they fired. Worse, his own fleet was being dragged into chaos by the swarm of desperate outsiders. His patience snapped. He ordered the Super Heavy to unleash its weapon immediately, coordinates locked on the heart of the colony. In the bunkers, alarms screamed as the targeting systems locked onto their position. The commander whispered a single order: "Fire everything," and the cannons answered. The last barrage roared into the sky, streaking upward with trails of fire. The shells struck the Super Heavy just as its weapon reached full charge. For a moment, silence gripped the battlefield. The glow of the giant ship wavered, its core pulsing violently, torn between release and collapse. Then came the explosion. The blast ripped across the heavens, brighter than dawn, a fireball so vast it lit the planet's surface like daylight. The shockwave shattered Imperial formations, tearing through their ships, leaving wreckage drifting in flames. On the ground, people screamed and covered their eyes, bunkers groaned as the earth trembled. The ragtag fleet was flung in all directions, battered but alive, their ships rolling through waves of fire. And when the light faded, the Super Heavy was gone. Only fragments remained, burning as they fell through the atmosphere like meteors. The humans in the bunkers erupted in cries of disbelief, laughter, tears. The impossible had happened. The weapon meant to end them all had been destroyed by their last desperate strike. But victory was not yet certain. The Empire's remaining fleet still hovered above, stunned but not defeated. The Imperial commander, his face pale and furious, refused to retreat. He swore the colony would pay, even if it cost him every ship under his command. He rallied what was left of his forces and ordered them to descend, to wipe out the survivors by any means. The ragtag fleet, battered and broken, made their final stand. Their captains broadcast one last message, not of surrender, but of defiance. Together they dove toward the Imperial ships, fighting like wolves cornered by lions. And below, the human artillery crews, with barely any shells left, prepared for the next wave. Then came the unexpected twist. The hidden beacons that had betrayed the humans suddenly went dark. The Imperial commander's targeting systems blinked out. His precision strikes lost. Confusion rippled through his fleet. He demanded answers, but there were none. On the ground, engineers rushed to report to the human commander. The betrayal had ended. Someone, or something, had shut the signals down from inside the colony. It was not sabotage from loyalists. It was the traitors themselves. Realizing that the Empire had no intention of sparing them, that their promises of mercy were lies, they had turned against their own betrayal in the final moments. Too late to erase the damage they had caused, but enough to deny the Empire its perfect kill. This shift gave the humans one last sliver of hope. The Empire was disoriented, their great weapon lost, their precision gone. And in that chaos, the ragtag fleet struck hard, tearing into their ships with reckless fury. The humans on the surface, their last shells loaded, aimed once more at the enemy vessels descending through the clouds. The final exchange was brutal. The sky filled with fire as ships clashed, debris raining down in burning trails. The ground shook as cannons fired their last, every shot a scream of defiance. Civilians huddled in shelters, listening to the thunder above, unsure if they would live to see the outcome. And then, slowly, the tide turned. One by one, the Imperial ships fell. Some were destroyed in combat, others broke formation and fled, unwilling to die for a lost cause. The Imperial commander, consumed by pride, refused to retreat until his flagship was surrounded. The ragtag captains hailed him, demanding surrender. He refused, and so his ship burned, consumed in the same fire he had once sought to unleash. When the dust settled, silence spread across the battlefield. The Empire's fleet was gone, either destroyed or scattered. The ragtag fleet, though decimated, still hovered above, their surviving ships limping in orbit. On the ground, the artillery stood silent, their barrels cracked and smoking, their crews collapsing in exhaustion. The humans had survived. Against all odds, against betrayal and overwhelming power, they had endured. But the final twist lingered. The beacons, though shut down, had broadcast long enough. Somewhere in the Empire's core worlds, signals had already been received. Reinforcements would come eventually, stronger and more merciless than before. The victory was real, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of a larger war. The human commander knew this as he walked among the battered crews, placing a hand on their shoulders, speaking words of gratitude. He looked to the sky where wreckage still burned as it fell. "We've won today," he said quietly. "But tomorrow the galaxy will come for us. And when it does, they will know we are not afraid. The ragtag captain sent a final message before vanishing into the stars. They had not come as saviors, but they left as allies, bound by the fire of survival and the blood of sacrifice. Their ships faded into the darkness, leaving the humans to rebuild. The civilians emerged from the shelters to see the sky cleared of imperial might for the first time in living memory. Children pointed at the falling debris like shooting stars. Families embraced, tears streaming down their faces. The colony had been scarred, but it was alive. And as night fell again, the ruins glowed with embers. The people gathered, whispering of the story they would carry forward. The story of how they stood against the Empire, how they fired their cannons until the sky itself broke. A story that would spread far beyond their world, carried by smugglers, traders, and refugees, until even the Empire could not silence it. For the Empire, the loss of the Super Heavy was a wound that would never heal. For humanity, it was proof that no force, no matter how vast, was invincible. And in that fragile silence, with the ashes of battle still warm, the humans stood ready for whatever came next. Smoke still drifted across the colony as the fires from the battle burned low, their glow fading into the dark. The thunder of cannons had gone silent, leaving behind a stillness so deep it felt almost unnatural. For hours no one spoke. Soldiers and civilians alike simply stood there, staring at the sky where the Imperial fleet had once blotted out the stars. Now only fragments remained, drifting wreckage burning like faint candles in orbit. Humanity had survived. Against every calculation, against every doubt, the colony still stood. In the command bunker, the human commander sat slumped in his chair, the weight of the moment pressing down harder than the battle itself. He had given everything to hold the line, and now that the fighting was done, exhaustion hit like a tidal wave. Around him, officers moved slowly, almost unsure what to do. They had expected to die. Instead, they had won a victory no one in the galaxy would believe until they saw it with their own eyes. Messages came from across the colony. Families reunited in the shelters. Survivors dug through rubble to pull out neighbors. Medics worked through the night, tending to the wounded, their hands raw and their clothes soaked with sweat and blood. The artillery crews lay in the dirt beside their machines, too tired to celebrate, but with faint smiles on their faces. They had done the impossible. They had silenced the Empire's laughter. Above, the surviving ships of the ragtag fleet orbited slowly. Their hulls were torn, their engines barely functioning, but they remained. They sent down words of farewell, promising to spread the story of this victory to every corner of space they touched. They carried the truth, that human artillery had shattered an Empire's warships, that steel and fire had stood against plasma and antimatter and endured. They would vanish back into the void, but their part in the story would live on. The question of the traitors lingered heavily. In the aftermath, their fate was uncovered. Many had already perished when the Empire turned on them, betrayed by the very force they had served. Those who survived stood silent before their people, no excuses left to offer. Justice would come, though not in the form of executions or cruelty. Instead, they would spend their lives rebuilding what their betrayal had nearly destroyed. Redemption would not erase their choices, but it would shape their future. The people of the colony had no time for endless grudges. Survival demanded unity. The commander walked through the battered city at dawn, watching smoke rise from the ruins. Children clung to their parents, pointing at the craters where shells had landed. Farmers returned to the edges of their fields, clearing wreckage and salvaging tools. Engineers were already sketching designs for stronger defenses. And scattered among the ruins, the great artillery pieces stood silent, blackened by fire and cracked from overuse. They had given everything. Some would never fire again, their barrels split by the fury of their last shots. Others would be repaired and kept hidden once more, not as relics, but as guardians. Word spread quickly beyond the colony. Traders whispered of it in distant ports. Refugees carried the tale to worlds still under imperial control. Even within the Empire, the story could not be contained. That a single human colony had destroyed an Imperial Super Heavy shook the galaxy to its core. The Empire tried to dismiss it as propaganda, but doubt had already taken root. If humans could stand against such power, then perhaps the Empire was not invincible after all. For the humans themselves, the meaning was clear. They had not just defended their home, they had sent a message to the entire galaxy. They had proven that old artillery, the weapons so often mocked as obsolete, could still shatter warships and topple arrogance. They had reminded everyone that war was not decided only by technology, but by determination, ingenuity, and the refusal to bow down. Humanity had turned weakness into strength, and in doing so had changed the course of history. Yet the victory came with sobering truth. The Empire was vast, and this battle was only a small wound to its pride. Retaliation would come. Stronger fleets would descend, with more firepower than the colony could ever withstand alone. The people knew this, but they were not afraid. They had faced death and won. Fear had no hold on them anymore. The commander addressed the survivors in the heart of the colony. His voice carried across the square, steady though his body trembled with fatigue. He spoke of the sacrifices made, of the friends who had fallen, of the allies who had stood with them in their darkest hour. He told them the Empire would return, but that humanity was ready, not just with cannons and shells, but with spirit. "We are not relics," he said. "We are not weak. We are human, and that means we endure." The crowd stood in silence, some with tears streaming down their faces, others holding their children tightly. They knew the path ahead would be hard. They knew the Empire's shadow still loomed. But in that moment, they also knew they were part of something greater than survival. They were part of a story that would echo across the stars. As days turned into weeks, the colony rebuilt. Craters became gardens again, ruins were cleared to make way for new homes, and the artillery was hidden in fresh bunkers, ready for the day they might be called upon once more. The ragtag fleet kept its promise, spreading word of the victory, stirring unrest in places long thought broken. Across the galaxy, whispers of rebellion began to grow louder. The Empire, shaken but not broken, gathered its forces in silence. Plans for retaliation brewed, but uncertainty gnawed at them. The arrogance that once fueled their every command had been cracked. If one colony could stand, how many more might follow? The Empire's greatest strength, its aura of invincibility, had been wounded in a way no weapon could repair. In the quiet nights after the battle, survivors would sit by fires and share their memories. They spoke of the deafening roar of the cannons, of the fear that gripped them as the sky turned to fire, of the relief that followed when the Super Heavy exploded. They spoke of friends lost, of strangers who had stood together as family, and of the moment they realized humanity was not alone in the galaxy. Their story became their strength, and so while the ruins still smoked and the scars of battle remained fresh, hope grew stronger than fear. Humanity had faced the Empire's laughter and answered with thunder. They had stood against the impossible and proven that no power, no matter how vast, could crush a people who refused to kneel. The story would be told for generations. The day human artillery shattered Imperial warships. The day old steel broke new arrogance. The day a colony at the edge of nowhere lit a fire that could spread across the stars. It was more than victory. It was a reminder that humanity was never to be underestimated again. And as the stars shone once more over the battered world, the people looked upward not with fear, but with determination. They knew the war was far from over, but they also knew that they had already changed everything.